So thanks so much for speaking with us, Brien. We're the Love Now movement, and we are sitting in, I believe, 102 degree heat now. Maybe it's going up to 108, I believe, today. Joshua Tree in California, in the middle of the desert, at Contact in the desert. And we're so lucky to be speaking with you today, and I am absolutely excited to hear what's the latest news on the elongated skulls.
Well, the latest news is that we're actually starting to do DNA testing, which has taken a long time, mainly because there are only 10 laboratories in the world that can properly do this. Some people think that the DNA testing of an ancient person or skull is the same thing as having your DNA tested, and it's completely different, because when your blood is taken for DNA testing, it's alive and it's perfectly intact, but as soon as you die, your DNA starts to break down. And over the course of 2,000 years, it is literally in tiny, tiny fragments. So it's only the most modern supercomputers that can have the capability of looking at the DNA and trying to figure out how to put it back together, not in reality, but to be able to match the codes up so that you can figure out what ethnicities were involved in a certain individual. This has never been done with any skulls, as far as I know, in Peru or Bolivia, because there are no facilities like that in Peru or Bolivia. They don't even have carbon-14 testing capability. So when they make judgment calls about how old a skull or a civilization is, a lot of it's based on guesswork. And I come from a scientific background, so we're getting into the actual science of who these people may have been and where they came from, because standard cranial deformation, which is where you alter the shape of a baby's skull, is one thing, but some of these skulls are so complicated in design, they look natural, and if they're natural, I think that they originally were, living like that, and may not be human beings as we regard ourselves as being, something either slightly or majorly different.
With all of the local culture, the indigenous culture, what do they say about the skulls?
There are so few Peruvians who are interested in pre-Columbian history, because they've been brainwashed for 500 years that history is not important. The modern day is important, and so that's one of the reasons I live in Peru, is to find the experts who still retain the knowledge, whether they're oral tradition people or anthropologists. One of my greatest teachers is called Teo Paredes, and he lives in Cusco. He's both a PhD anthropologist, and he's a wisdom keeper as well. So he's got a perfectly balanced mind, and some of the information he has is amazing. He and I just automatically, when we met, we knew we had to connect and talk, and he's one of those people who has profound information, and he just answers any question that anybody answers. He knows for sure that the city of Cusco is thousands of years older than the Inca, that they found it as an abandoned megalithic city. And he's very intrigued with the elongated skulls, because he's also assisting us in trying to get the DNA testing done, because he would like to know, as a Peruvian, whether or not these people relate to the oral traditions of, in some cases, beings or people coming down, great ancestors who then mixed with the indigenous population. Another example is no one knows where the Inca got their profound level of information, because their society was so complex and so wonderful as regards fellow humans. That the High Inca was the chief, he was the caretaker of the people. He was not the ruler of the people, but all Western archaeology and the colonial Spanish writings are stilted towards a European perspective. And
the hierarchical perspective.
Yeah, which is incorrect. You have to learn the oral traditions, and then you find out that it was actually a very wonderful society where almost everybody was very happy to be under the caretakership of the Inca ruling class, which is what they were. The Inca were not everybody; they were a family of very special people who took care of their society.
But the skulls are most likely much older now than the Inca civilization.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So With the skulls, and I know I was in Paracas, I think in 2000, and that's where many of them were found.
The largest human skulls or human elongated skulls are all from Paracas.
Oh.
So there's one very famous one that has been labeled as being a Nephilim or an Anunnaki or an alien-human hybrid or whatever. That one was found in one specific graveyard called Chongos.
Yes.
And that's where all of the great, cone-head-looking elongated skulls came from.
And are there any other skulls like that in Peru or only in that place?
There are. That's why I recently wrote a book about, specifically about Peru and Bolivia, because, I've done studies of all examples of cranial deformation done around the world. It was always only the nobility to which this was done, but it's only in Peru and Bolivia that you get these, very large skulls, some around the Lake Titicaca area, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, but also in the Cusco area as well.
And is there a connection with like the finds that we find at Pumapunku? Like I remember in one of your videos where you're showing, and where anyone who's been to Peru will see that the way the rocks are cut and the precision and the so-called drilling that couldn't be done by what we would call ancient humans or our so-called ancestors. Is there a connection between possibly the skull people, the elongated skull people?
Definitely.
And this?
Yeah, definitely. There's actually a graveyard that has just been discovered near Pumapunku, but it's actually outside of the jurisdiction of the Tiwanaku Pumapunku complex. That's a governmental archaeological site.
Yeah.
And this man who has a restaurant was digging for an outbuilding, digging a foundation, and he actually stumbled upon the Royal Tiwanaku Cemetery on his property. And there he found some very large elongated skulls. We're hoping to get those DNA tested either this year or next year.
And are you receiving support from the Peruvian government?
We're working with them. It's a very bureaucratic process, but the director of the Archaeology Museum in Lima, which is the central museum, she is very excited to work with us because, again, Peru does not have complex facilities for doing carbon-14 or DNA testing. She's very interested, and that one of the head archaeologists of the Inca Museum, who could be the Paracas culture expert, is very much working with us. It's just the paperwork is quite complex because everything has to be very specific. In order to DNA test the skulls, he has to write up a report of which ones he wants tested, what samples will be taken from the skulls, where the facilities are that the testing will be done, who's going to come down to do the sampling. But I believe this week he's actually selecting the ones that he wants done. So that's been a 1.5-year process, and hopefully it'll accelerate from there.
So I understand that you are a scientist, but when you're working with the skulls, when you're holding them, you've been in close contact. Do you get any sense, any energetic feeling for them? Does it feel different to you, or is there any spiritual revelations that you're getting around them?
Very much so. I was born psychic, and my great hero was Leonardo da Vinci, who had a very balanced mind. He was left and right brain, and when you have both of those, at a reasonable amount of power, they sometimes they conflict with each other. It's like shut up. But when they interconnect, then that's when you get like great ability. So I was when I hold physically hold one of the skulls, I don't feel like I'm holding my ancestor, but I get this sense very much that they want to be known, or they want their knowledge to come back, because dry archaeology doesn't do it. You're talking about ancient human beings who have been largely forgotten, and like any human being, they want to be remembered. They want to tell you who they were, what they ate, everything about themselves, and that's my pursuit.
And are you able to psychically connect with them through? And what information else do you get from them? Like, are they giving you? Are you channeling information from them in a way?
I believe so. Literally, they seem to be saying, "Speak for us. Learn from us. Go to this site." study every aspect of who we study. Our, look at our ceramics. We had the potter's wheel. Nobody else in the Americas had this. Look at our textiles. Look at the colors. Look at the intensity of the colors. Figure out where the plants are that did this. We were whale hunters. Try to figure out what kind of ships we were able to construct to be able to do that, and then ultimately try to figure out where we came from, because we arrived 3,000 years ago as a full-blown civilization. We are not necessarily the product of a simple people becoming complex. Part of our ancestry comes from somewhere else on the planet. Figure out where that is, for the benefit of themselves, but also for the benefit of the Peruvian people, to know their history, those that care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And is there a connection as well with the Nasca lines?
Yeah, actually I wrote a book about Nasca because there are so many different theories about how they were made, when they were made, why they were made, and so living in Paracas, which is 4 hours north of Nasca itself, the Nasca system begins in Paracas. There's a giant figure called the Candelabra, or Candelabro, and it's the beginning of the system. And if you follow from there to Nasca, which is going from the northwest to the southeast, all the way along that at least 150 kilometers or more, there are geoglyphs. And so they were created over the course of 1,000 years, first by the Paracas starting about 500 BC, and then when the Paracas and Nazca either melded together, or my belief is the Nazca people exterminated the Paracas, then for the next 500 years you had more constructions. And so when you're talking about a 1,000-year time period, you're not talking about a function, you're talking about different reasons for creating them at different stages, because also starting in about 100 BC, the area began to become more and more desert. And so the earlier ones were symbolic. Some of them are spiritual pathways, like the spider, for example, has one leg sticking out and it's open at the end. So that was a spiritual pathway to go through, probably on something like ayahuasca or San Pedro, and then you leave the way you came. But as time went on...
You mean on foot?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like each one of these figures, like the hummingbird, it's a maze that you walk through and then walk out of. But then as the desertification continued, then it became more pragmatic. They were trying to find water, so a lot of the lines represent underground streams. That's the only way that water exists on the coast of Peru, is either it upwells in certain places or they have to drill down. And even the ancient Paracas had techniques for digging down into and finding these ancient streams, and the Nazca continued that process.
So I went to Peru for the first time like 20 years ago, and was actually camping in Paracas in I think it was a national park there.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Beside a tiny wee little fishing restaurant, and we just sort of pitched a tent there, and then a couple of days later we were walking across the desert and had quite a few, I would call, extraordinary experiences just being there.
Uh-huh.
And then we flew up in a small plane and saw the Nazca lines, and during that whole journey I spent, I think, nearly 2 months traveling around Peru. I ended up going then to the lake Titicaca, and was sitting on, I believe it was the island, we also went up to Bolivia, we were in the island of the sun, and then there was no electricity, of course, no power.
Right.
And I was just sitting watching the sunset and feeling very connected to the land, and that I would return, of course, and have many, many times taking groups. And as I was sitting there, this golden ball came up like the size of a basketball, came up out of the water and came flying over and went boom into my chest, like I went, kind of recoiled from it. And the person sitting next to me said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Did you not see that?" He said, "No, what are you talking about?" And I kept smoking his Marlboro cigarette. And from that day on, I've had this very powerful connection with Peru and Bolivia, and have tried to understand so much about how all of these things are so important to our awakening here.
Right.
And what always is I think hard for people to understand is if we have this connection like you do, this psychic connection, and you're out there as a scientist, you're in the field, you're in all these sacred places every day, is why don't we receive clearer, more direct information?
Most people are just so preoccupied with daily life.
But people like us who are really focused on it, like is there some lesson in not receiving it directly, so to speak?
Well, that's a big question.
We like to ask the big questions.
Yeah, well, actually, no, but you and I are. I mean, I'm learning. I learn incrementally every single day, different aspects of my pursuit. I also try to control what avenues I'm looking at. So, you know, I guess I'm a specialist on the elongated skulls because I focus on that. As I said, David Childers and I wrote a book about the global phenomenon, but most other places in the world, it's not that interesting. But in Peru, it's really fascinating because the archaeologists don't know, you know, and I don't know if they refuse to pursue it or what. And also the megalithic structures of Egypt and Peru and Bolivia and Easter Island and Polynesia fascinate me too. But those are my focuses. I'm not a generalist like some of the more famous people are who go to interesting sites in Indonesia, then they go here and there, because that's, you know, I like to learn more and more about a limited number of things and look at interconnections. But funnily enough, I saw one of those basketball-sized things 2 months ago.
Oh wow!
And you know, people say you were hallucinating, but
well, of course we were. But tell us what happened.
No, I was.
This is all a hallucination.
Yeah, no, but I was on the third floor of our house, which is in the Paracas area, looking out at Orion, just because that's a childhood thing that my mom, you know, showed me. That's, you know, this in the sky, and this orange ball, which looked like it was glass or plastic, like it wasn't like a fuzzy energy field. This is like a ball, and it went straight. It was about 300 yards maybe in front of me, going from the south to the north, and just went straight past me, silent. 10 seconds later, it was gone, and I just sat in the chair for 10 minutes going, where are the other ones? And it was it. But it was like coherent going by me, so that's really kind of funny.
It didn't enter you?
No, it just went past, and I've had sightings before, and I simply get the feeling that they want to show me that you know, it's like we are here. I'm not malevolent and not necessarily good, evil, or whatever. Just like you are seeing me,
right.
Or you are seeing something we have made. Okay, think about that. Okay. Yeah.
And like in a lot of my work, I've been drinking ayahuasca and San Pedro with my shamanic teacher and in Peru and Bolivia, and during those ceremonies, of course, there is so much information that comes to you about the other realms. Have you had that experience with any connection with the skulls, or?
Not that so much. It's just that they're gradually telling me more and more about themselves and telling me how, you know, what the best ways are to learn more about them. You know, a lot of it, of course, is simply field work, going out to sites, because Peru is still being plundered by tomb robbers, usually poor people who are trying to feed their families.
Yeah.
People, whether they're Inca, or not Inca so much, but some, but Nazca people and Paracas people, ancient ones, are being dug up and looted, and the remains that are there are the things that I look at, the skulls, the fabrics, etc., to study who they were, and then of course we rebury what we find immediately.
So we're speaking about them in the past. Do you believe that they no longer exist here on Earth?
No, they disappeared. According to archaeologists, they appeared 3,000 years ago, and then they disappeared 2,000 years ago. And
en masse, or was it a gradual? We have no idea.
I think honestly, I think what happened was because of climate change. The Paracas were clearly a highly spiritual people. Ornamentation wasn't for flash or, you know, like, look how special I am. Everything was hyper important and symbolic. They were seemingly great users of the San Pedro cactus for reaching higher realms. And then you have the Nasca, you know, who are overly talked about. And what seems to have happened is, as desertification began, the Nasca, who were actually called the Topara, who lived farther north, as their poor land was starting to fail, they moved into the richer lands of the Paracas, and there is one site called Camacho, which was literally a killing field, where you have 50 to 100 Paracas royalty. With each skull has traumatic damage, like pieces missing or the jaws torn off. Or
They're
whatever.
elongated skulls?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I think that was the Nasca, because all of a sudden, at that point, the elongated skulls disappear, and the Paracas red hair, which they have, disappears, and then you have the rise of the Nasca population. Yeah.
So is it possible that they shifted into a higher dimension, or that they were massacred?
I think many were massacred, but I also think because of the ancient highway or road system, there's a major road, which is a highway today, and it's been built on top of an Inca road, and the Inca roads existed before the Inca. You know, the Inca had 25,000 miles of roads that interconnected, but this is one of the major ones that connects the Pacific Ocean with Cusco, and I think many of them were able to escape, and they followed that road, and they went to Cusco because that's in the highlands, and they may have been part of the ancestry of the Inca. And that's something we're going to work on, again, genetically, because we know people who have hopefully a fairly high quantum of actual Inca blood in them. You know, most people's bloodline has been reduced in terms of their native Inca because of intermixing with other people, the Spanish, the other native people, etc. But we do know members of who would be members of the royal Inca family, and we're going to at least ask if we can take a blood sample from them. One of them is an archaeologist, though, so she may be intrigued.
Right.
Yeah.
Just get a swab there. A swab.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's true. All we need is a swab. We don't
Yeah.
need to stick a needle in their arm. Yeah.
And what about the disappearance of the people apparently from Machu Picchu? Is that also something that could have been a dimensional shift?
It is possible. A number of elongated skulls have been found at Machu Picchu. What most people don't understand about it was that it was a very secret place during Inca times. It was almost like the Camp David of today, and the reason why it remained abandoned for so long is that the local people in general didn't know it existed. It's a very secret place for the High Inca to meet and discuss the affairs of state. And the story goes that the Inca had this incredible system of what were called chasqui runners, who were relay runners who would deliver messages and things like that. And as soon as the Spanish were entering Cusco, messages were sent to Machu Picchu telling them that this destructive force was there, and so they decided to abandon the city. And some of them may have been able to interdimensionally leave, but the majority of them probably escaped to a site called Vilcabamba, where they were able to stay in secret for at least 30 years before the Spanish were ever able to find them. And that is it's one of the two major entries and exit points from Machu Picchu, and it goes across this incredibly narrow ledge with a 1,000-foot drop, and then around the mountains, and then to the site of Vilcabamba, which is in the high jungle.
So let me ask you, what has been your most extraordinary experience working in Peru, working with the skulls, with Machu Picchu, all these sacred sites? What has been the most reality shift for you?
Well, I'm just so astonished that I'm so welcome there. The first time I went to Cusco, it felt like home, and
Yes.
I already knew the blueprint of the city.
Which is the panther?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It's shaped like a puma.
Yes.
And when my wife came with me for the first time, I guess on my third trip, she just kept saying, "How do you know where you're going?" And I said, "I don't know." But we spent a lot of time in Cusco, and I'm fortunate to have teachers there, indigenous teachers, because the Spanish were so cruel at trying to destroy any remnants of the Inca culture and program the people there to, forcibly to adopt the Spanish way of life, that it's literally like sewing a blanket back together. You get a little piece from here, a piece from there. And so I feel incredibly welcomed there by the ancient energy and people, that they're thankful.
And you take tours, yes? You have groups of people coming?
Yeah, we do. It's called Hidden Inca Tours, and it's not a full-time operation. It's just something my wife and I like to do. We have 2 large groups per year, and then sometimes I'll have a couple or 4 or 6 people for 1 to 5 days kind of thing. And we only do it part-time to make sure that we don't, overuse our welcome at these sites, because when you approach Sacsayhuaman or Machu Picchu, you have to make an offering of something like coca leaves, and that tells the energy that you have come to learn, and that's when the spiritual doors open up for you, because you have given before you've tried to accept, and that's it's a basic Native American principle. It's the same thing as giving tobacco to an elder.
Yes.
If they take the tobacco, you will have a conversation. If they don't, you're not having a conversation. And my wife, who is indigenous Peruvian, insists on that every time we go anywhere, and we always learn, sometimes subtly, sometimes profoundly, different aspects, and it all goes into the collective pool of what we're trying to do, and we own none of this information. The information is to come in, so it's to go back out to whoever wants to learn, whether they're Peruvian or Swedish or whatever.
Thank you so much, and we will leave all of your information and your wonderful books on the bottom of this YouTube.
Okay.
And let people know. And I just want to stress too that when people do go to sacred sites, and all the time that I've been in Peru, and every time we go to Sacsayhuaman, for example, we connect there with Pedro, the shaman of Sacsayhuaman, and that's how we enter. First we cleanse and we do ceremony, and then we're taken in. And I think that's so important, that as we do enter so many of these sacred sites, and I think more and more people travelling now. I remember in Machu Picchu there was nobody, and now you've got to get your tickets like years ahead almost. It's so busy, which is wonderful. But as we approach these places, let's approach them with great respect and great understanding, because they are such important places for our ancestors and for us to raise our dimensions. So thank you so much for your work, and I hope that we'll see you again, and in Peru and in Bolivia, and hopefully at our conference in New York.
Great.
Which we'll let you all know about. So.
Yeah, and just as a final example, at Sacsayhuaman, we stumbled across this, the term shaman is being overused, but this wisdom keeper of the area, and I literally, it's one of those synchronistic, you just bump into somebody, and we wandered around the site for 4 hours with him, and he's just going about stuff. And what you're not supposed to do is, you're not supposed to climb on these things, you're supposed to respect them as if, with even the stones, respect them as if they're people, respect them with dignity. And this one, foreign clown was climbing all over this ancient megalithic stone, and I turned to Senior Hector and I said, "Doesn't that offend you?" And he just said, "He won't learn anything. If you're offensive to the site just turns itself off." Goes, no. Yeah. And even a site like Machu Picchu, I've been 50 times, and every time I go, it's like the book opens, and they say, "Experience," and then when you come back, one page has been turned, and the book closes.
Beautiful ending. The book closes.
It does.